My name is Daniel, and this happened during the winter of 2022. I've lived in northern Minnesota for most of my life, so I'm used to rough winters, but that year was the coldest I can remember. Temperatures stayed around -20 most nights, and snowstorms were so frequent that the roads barely stayed clear for more than a few hours. My neighborhood sits on the edge of a huge frozen field that leads deep into a forest. Only 20 or so houses are on my street, and most people keep to themselves during winter. You don't really see kids playing outside when the wind feels like it could slice your ears off. This story took place on a Sunday night around 10:30 p.m. I had just returned from a late shift and was driving down the long road that leads into my neighborhood. Snow was coming down hard, those tiny, icy flakes that look harmless but make everything slippery. My windshield wipers were barely keeping up. I remember thinking the street looked unusually dark. Most houses turn off their porch lights by that time, but usually the town's snowplow trucks pass by every few hours. When they do, the road reflects the headlights long before you see the plow. That night, I didn't see anything. No light, no tracks, nothing. I figured maybe they hadn't gotten to my road yet. I turned into my street, and that's when I noticed something strange. About 300 feet behind me, far down the road, a snowplow turned onto my street. Its headlights were dim, almost yellowish, and one of them flickered. The plow blade scraped the ground with a long metallic sound that echoed across the houses. At first, I didn't think anything of it, until I realized it wasn't plowing anything. The blade stayed low, but it didn't push a single bit of snow. It just scraped, like it was dragging metal on bare pavement. I slowed down, confused, and the plow slowed down too. I sped up. The plow sped up. I wasn't sure what to think, so I kept going until I reached my driveway. I expected the plow to pass, but instead it stopped right in front of my house. The plow screeched one last time before going silent. The headlights stayed on, pointing directly at my living room window. I sat in my car for a minute watching it. No one stepped out, no door opened, no movement inside the cabin, just that flickering headlight. Finally, I got out of my car and hurried to my door. The second I stepped inside, the plow's engine shut off. I peeked through my blinds in the living room. The plow was still there, but the driver? He was now standing outside the truck. He was wearing a thick winter coat with reflective stripes, but the hood covered his face entirely. He stood unnaturally still, facing my house. Not moving, not adjusting his gloves, nothing. Just staring. I pulled away from the window immediately. A few seconds later, loud footsteps crunched through the snow. Slow, heavy steps approaching my front door. I stood completely still inside the house, listening. He stopped right outside. Then, 3 knocks. Not normal knocks. These were spaced far apart, heavy, like someone using the side of their fist. I didn't answer. Instead, I slid the deadbolt quietly. A minute passed. Then another knock. Then nothing. I stayed standing there, barely breathing, until I finally looked out the peephole. He was gone, but the plow wasn't. I called the county dispatch office to ask if any snowplow was scheduled on my street. The woman checked and told me something that made my stomach sink. "Sir, our plow truck stopped 2 hours ago because of visibility. There shouldn't be any plows on residential roads tonight." I asked if a private plow company might be out. "No," she replied. "Private plows don't operate after 9 p.m. because of the liability during blizzards." So who the hell was outside my house? I went from window to window slowly, checking each blind. The plow was still there, but the man was nowhere in sight. Suddenly, from the back of the house, I heard a soft scraping noise, like metal sliding across ice. I froze. It wasn't coming from the road anymore. It was coming from my backyard. I I rushed to the back window and lifted the blind just enough to see out. My breath caught in my throat. The excavator blade, the exact same blade I saw out front, was now sitting in my backyard, completely detached from the truck, dragged there. Behind my garage, the head of the plow truck operator slowly leaned into view. Only it wasn't a hood, it was a mask, white, no facial features except 2 holes for eyes, and he was staring directly at my window. I stepped back immediately. I called 911 this time, not the county dispatch. While waiting on the line, I heard the scraping noise again, closer this time, something metallic dragging through snow, inching towards my back door. "Sir, stay on the line. Officers are on their way," the dispatcher said. I went upstairs, locked myself in the bathroom, and waited with the lights off. For the next several minutes, I heard footsteps circling my house, sometimes slow, sometimes fast, sometimes stopping right outside a window. Then, silence. When police finally arrived, they searched the property. The snowplow on the street was gone. The blade in my backyard was still there, but the footprints around the house were strange. They weren't random. They formed a perfect circle around my home. Several circles, actually, as if someone had repeatedly walked around it for hours. The police filed a report, but never found who did it. They said the plow blade was old, rusted, likely from a private yard or salvage lot. I haven't seen that snowplow again, but every winter since, I hear scraping sounds in the middle of the night. Sometimes far away, sometimes close. Too close.
My name is Lucas, and this happened during the winter of 2019 when I lived in Anchorage, Alaska. If you've never been here in winter, it's almost impossible to explain how intense the snow gets. Some nights the drifts get so high they swallow your car tires, and the wind feels like it's carrying shards of glass. I lived in a small rental cabin at the time. Nothing fancy, just a single bedroom, a bathroom, and a narrow living space. The cabin sat at the end of a long private driveway surrounded by pine trees. Beautiful during the day, unsettling at night. This story took place during one of the worst blizzards we had that year. It was a Friday evening, around 8 p.m., and I was inside playing a game on my laptop when I heard a loud thud outside. Not like a branch falling, but something heavier. Then another thud, and another. They were rhythmic. At first, I assumed the plow truck was clearing the private road, but when I peeked outside, I didn't see a truck. I didn't see anything at all, just a wall of snow and swirling wind. My porch light barely illuminated more than a few feet. The thudding continued, so I put on boots and my heavy coat, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped out onto the porch. The sound stopped immediately. That alone was enough to unsettle me, but I kept scanning the area anyway. My breath fogged the flashlight beam as I aimed it toward the side of the cabin. That's when I noticed something strange. Along the side of the house, the snow had formed a sort of tunnel. Not a natural drift. It looked carved, shaped, as if someone had dug into the snow to create a narrow passageway that led toward the backyard. My first thought was that maybe the wind had formed a weird drift, but the edges were too clean. The path was too straight. It was made intentionally. I stood there staring at it, feeling uneasy. The tunnel was about 4 feet tall, just big enough for someone to crouch and move through. I didn't go in. Something in my gut stopped me. Instead, I went back inside and locked the door. About an hour passed with no more noises, so I tried to relax. I put on a movie and eventually ended up falling asleep on the couch. At around 1:30 a.m., I woke up to another sound. This one wasn't outside. It was inside the walls. My first thought was maybe a pipe freezing or something shifting because of the temperature drop. But the sound wasn't random. It was slow, deliberate. a dragging sound, like someone moving along the inside of the wall. The noise traveled from the back of the cabin, heading slowly toward the living room. I froze on the couch, staring at the wall, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. I grabbed my phone to call the property owner, but before I could press the button, something happened that I still don't have an explanation for. A voice whispered from the other side of the wall, clear as day. "Let me in." I dropped my phone instantly and stumbled backward. There was no mistaking it. Someone was inside the wall or right on the other side of it. But that made no sense. There was no crawl space, no attic access from the living room. The structure was too small for anything like that. I stood there gripping the nearest object I could find, a fireplace poker, while trying not to shake. The whisper came again, slightly louder. "Let me in." I backed toward the hall, inching toward my bedroom, but before I reached the doorway, I heard something else. Snow compacting right outside my window. I turned and slowly pulled the curtain back, and standing there, only inches from the glass, inside the snow tunnel, was a man. His face was ghostly pale, almost blue like he'd been outside for hours. He wore a heavy winter coat, but the hood was down, and his eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring directly into my window. He moved closer until his nose touched the glass. Then he said it again, "Let me in." This time I could see his breath fogging the window. He was that close. I stumbled back and ran into my bedroom, slamming the door and locking it. I grabbed my phone and called 911. My voice was shaking so badly I could barely explain the situation. The dispatcher told me to stay where I was and keep the door locked. As I stood there, I heard the crunch of snow outside again, slow footsteps traveling around the cabin. Then a sudden loud slam on the back wall, then another and another. He was pounding on the walls, circling the cabin over and over, hitting it harder each time. At one point, he tried the back door, then the kitchen window, then the bathroom window. Every attempt accompanied by the same whispered plea, "Let me in." I hid in my closet and listened as he made a full circle again, scraping, tapping, pounding. When the police finally arrived, I heard their voices yelling outside. I stayed inside until they knocked on my bedroom door and told me it was safe. 2 officers searched the property, while another spoke with me. They didn't find the man, but they did find the tunnel. The officer said it was too clean for wind and had clearly been carved with hands or a shovel. It stretched from the tree line all the way to my living room window, about 40 feet. They also found footprints around the cabin, but they were erratic, like the man had been circling over and over. One set of prints led into the forest, but they disappeared completely after 20 yards, as if the man had suddenly vanished or been picked up by a vehicle. The police never found him. The next morning, I packed my things and left the cabin. I haven't been back since. Every winter now, if snow falls thick enough, I check my window repeatedly, looking for any sign of a tunnel forming. Because that night, he wasn't trying to get out of the cold. He wanted inside my home, and he wasn't leaving until he found a way in.
My name is Aaron, and this happened when I was 22 years old. I lived in northern Wisconsin at the time, in a small town near a frozen lake called Hawthorne Lake. The place is beautiful in the summer, but in winter it becomes dangerously silent. Thick fog settles over the ice, and the temperature at night drops so low you can hear the wood inside your house cracking. This was during the winter of 2018, and I was living alone in a small rental cabin that overlooked the lake. It was the first time I had ever lived by myself, and I was proud of it. But looking back, I should have never been out there alone. This story happened over the course of 2 nights. Night 1, the lights. It was around 11 p.m. when I first noticed the lights on the lake. I was washing dishes and staring out the kitchen window when I saw two small white lights far out on the frozen surface. Too small to be headlights, too bright to be flashlights. They hovered in place, about 5 feet above the ice. I dried my hands and leaned closer to the window. The lights weren't steady. They flickered slowly, almost like someone was tying them to lanterns that swayed in the wind. But they weren't lanterns. They were too bright, too white, too synchronized. I stepped outside onto the porch to get a better look. The moment I opened the door, both lights went out, just vanished. Not dimmed, gone instantly. I stood out there in the freezing air for a few minutes waiting for them to reappear, but nothing did. I eventually convinced myself it was some kind of ice fishing setup, maybe someone testing strong LED gear. The lake was used for that sometimes. But the next morning when I walked down to the shoreline, the surface of the lake was untouched. No holes, no sled tracks, no footprints. Nobody had been out there. At least, nobody normal. Night 2, the knock. The following night, around the same time, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard something that made my skin crawl. It wasn't a knock on the door, it was a knock on the window. 3 slow taps. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. My bedroom window faced the lake, and the only thing behind my cabin was a steep drop-off in a wall of trees. There was no reason at all for someone to be behind my cabin. I stayed completely silent, holding my breath. After a few seconds, another 3 knocks. Tap, tap, tap. This time, slower. My first instinct was to turn off the lamp beside me, but I was too afraid to move. I stared at the curtains, waiting for a shadow to appear behind them. Nothing. After about a minute, I slowly reached for my phone and texted my neighbor 2 cabins down, an older guy named Mark. "Someone's knocking on my window. Are you awake?" He replied instantly. "Don't move. Stay away from the windows. I'm calling the sheriff right now." That reply was almost worse than the knocking, because it meant he took it seriously. I whispered to myself, okay, just stay here. But before I could settle my nerves, I heard footsteps outside, crunching in the snow. Slow, heavy, not rushed, walking along the side of my house, heading toward the front door. I couldn't see the door from my bedroom, but I could hear the snow compressing with each step. Then, I heard the metal screen door creak open. Then, a soft, slow knock on the front door. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Then, from the door, a voice. But it didn't sound right. It sounded like someone trying to speak while their teeth were chattering violently. Erin. My name. It said my name. But nobody knew I was staying at the lake except my landlord and my neighbor. I grabbed my phone and texted Mark again. He said my name. His reply came immediately. Don't answer it. Don't speak. Don't go near the windows. I can see someone on your porch from here. The sheriff is on the way. I nearly dropped the phone. Mark's cabin was far, but not that far. If he could see my porch, then he could see the person. I typed back, "Who is it?" His reply took longer this time. When it came in, my stomach dropped. It's not anyone I recognize. And Erin, they're not wearing a coat. No coat? In -18-degree temperatures on a frozen lake? The knocking at the front door suddenly stopped. Silence. Then, the doorknob jiggled. Slow, firm, like whoever or whatever was out there was testing it. I backed farther into my bedroom until I hit the wall. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. The jiggling stopped. Then the footsteps started again, moving away from the front door and toward my bedroom window. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I stared at my curtains, praying I wouldn't see a silhouette behind them. But something worse happened. A hand pressed against the glass from the outside. Just the faint outline of long fingers sliding down the window. The frost smeared where the skin touched it. Then a whisper. Erin. I covered my mouth to stop myself from screaming. A few seconds later, flashing red and blue lights filled the cabin walls. The sheriff's truck pulled up beside my house, and the footsteps outside stopped completely. When the deputy knocked and announced himself, I finally moved again. When they walked me outside, I expected to see footprints leading back toward the lake or into the woods, but the sheriff and deputy stood there staring at the ground. There were no footprints at all. Not by the window, not by the front door, not anywhere on the property. But there was something. 2 faint glowing white lights hovering far out on the lake, exactly where I had seen them the night before. And slowly, they faded away into the fog. The sheriff suggested it might have been reflections or light distortion, but Mark saw the figure clearly. He insisted it wasn't a reflection and it wasn't human. I moved out 2 days later. I don't go near frozen lakes anymore, and sometimes in the middle of winter, I swear I see 2 faint lights hovering out in the distance, just long enough for me to know they're still out there, still watching, still waiting.